What's shaking, everyone? It's Khan-Swaylo here, and I'll be honest, I've been trying to make this video all day long, and I just can't properly characterize how I feel about the Kenosha situation. It seems like we're stuck in a time loop. It seems like every few days you wake up, you see the police being accused of police brutality. You see somebody who you think is obviously in the wrong being cast in bronze as this martyr of a cause. And in the aftermath of a horrific situation, you see senseless rioting, senseless destruction. And at the end of the day, nothing gets done about it. The cycle begins anew, and in a week's time, I'll be talking about another riot breaking out over some bad or incomplete information. So the incident I'm referencing right now is the Jacob Blake shooting. Now, all of this information is going to be based upon the one video that's currently out there. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but Jacob Blake is the victim of this shooting. What happened was he was being followed by the police, and something prior to the recording happened where the cops had pulled their guns out of their holsters, had them trained on Jacob Blake, and by the end of the video he was shot what appears to be 7 times. We don't have the full context of the situation. I err on the side of the cops in this one, where we don't know what led to them pulling out their firearms. Standard police operating procedure would lead you to believe that they aren't waving their guns around without reasonable suspicion that somebody in their proximity poses a threat. And it's hard to come to a different conclusion based on that information and looking at recent history where police have been immediately cast as the villains of this story, only for more information to come out that clarifies the situation and proves them to be correct. So I've got a few articles pulled up here in relation to Jacob Blake and his situation as it pertains to the riots in Kenosha. So first we'll start with a Chicago Tribune article. Kenosha national spotlight after black man is shot by police. Pepper spray fired at protesters after door is ripped from hinges at government building. So the riots themselves began overnight, August 23rd into August 24th early morning, and in kind of a shocking turn of events, something we haven't really seen before, they reconvened in daylight outside of a government building where a press conference was going to be happening. But let's just continue on with the article here and take a look. Protests continued Monday in Kenosha in the wake of police officer shooting a black man, and authorities remained tight-lipped even as national attention focused on the city just north of the Wisconsin border. Kenosha residents woke up Monday morning to burnt-out cars, broken glass, and damaged buildings following clashes Sunday with police that were touched off by the shooting of 29-year-old Jacob Blake. Video appears to show an officer firing several shots as Blake was facing away from the cop. Blake was hospitalized in serious condition. It seems as though he's going to pull through. He had a successful surgery earlier Monday morning into Monday afternoon. So, as much as we know right now, I'm thankful that he's going to pull through, and hopefully everything's alright. Based on the information we have right now, I wish him nothing but a speedy recovery. Monday afternoon, police in riot gear blasted pepper spray at an agitated crowd gathered near the door to the government building that people had ripped from its hinges. This is what I was referencing about the early daylight protests, uneasy protests. Authorities were preparing for potential further unrest at night, and Democratic Governor Tony Evers summoned 125 National Guard members to monitor the city. Kenosha County officials announced an 8 p.m. curfew for the more urban eastern portion of the county. By early evening, several hundred protesters had gathered in downtown Kenosha under the watch of cops in riot gear. Clearly, they're anticipating something truly terrible happening this evening. And it's hard to argue against that judgment. Sunday's shooting was the latest to galvanize outraged demonstrators who have spilled into the streets repeatedly in the 3 months since George Floyd died beneath the knee of a Minneapolis cop. There's a video to be made later about the released, or rather leaked, body cam footage in respect to the George Floyd incident, so we'll let them spew their propaganda right now. Like other controversial uses of force, this one was captured on a harrowing video shared widely online, even as authorities said little about the circumstances of the shooting. To be fair, the video itself shows very little about the situation. The confrontation unfolded as police responded to a call of domestic incident about 5 p.m. Sunday in Kenosha. Footage shared online, Blake walks the sidewalk around the front of the SUV to the driver's side door as officers followed him with their guns pointed. As Blake opens the door and leans into the SUV, an officer grabs his shirt from behind and appears to open fire while Blake has his back turned. Well, this is what I mean we don't have full context. What I just read here, Blake walks from the sidewalk around the front to the SUV to the driver's side door as the officers followed him with their guns pointed. Clearly something happened prior to the recording began that made the officers feel uneasy enough to remove their guns from their holsters. In the current climate, no cop is wanting to recreate the George Floyd situation, have any kind of a questionable altercation with, especially with a minority, and spark national outrage. So at time of recording, we really do not know what led to this. 7 shots can be heard, though it isn't clear how many struck Blake or how many of the officers fired. During the shooting, a woman can be seen jumping up and down in the streets as she screams. The 3 officers at the scene were placed on administrative leave, standard practices in shootings by police, while the Wisconsin Department of Justice investigates. Authorities did not disclose the identities of the officers involved or say whether they believed Blake was armed. I'm glad the names and identities of these cops are not out there right now. There was a situation in Seattle where, I do believe it's Seattle at least, there was a cop placed on administrative leave for shooting, and Antifa came to their house, pulled him out, beat him up, and we don't need these lunatics administering any sort of vigilante justice. Court records show Blake has a pending criminal case that started last month. Records indicate Kenosha County prosecutors charged Blake on July 6th with third-degree sexual assault, trespassing, and disorderly conduct in connection with domestic abuse. An arrest warrant was issued for Blake the following day. The records contain no further details and do not list an attorney for Blake. Well, I actually have the arrest warrant here pulled up. So as you can see here, here's a little summary of the case as well as a little bit more detail as to what he was charged with. So, a misdemeanor battery count, a strangulation, a misdemeanor and a felony, bail jumping charges, as well as disorderly conduct. So, based in the video, what we see here that led to, in the video of his shooting, is a blatant disregard for police authority. He was resisting any sort of attempt for the officers to de-escalate the situation. In the video, if you listen, they're repeatedly saying, "Get down, sir, we don't want to do this, stop, don't get in the vehicle." They're trying to de-escalate the situation before it turns violent. So what we see right now, the response with the riots that took over Kenosha, and more than likely are going to continue into tomorrow as well, is we're seeing half-truths being presented and whole lies being created to perpetuate a narrative that the mainstream media wants to push out there. They want to put Jacob Blake as being 100% innocent, as being somebody who is just going about their own business, who was stopped from driving away, who was being deprived of his right to free movement, being deprived of his free will, as it were. even in the short video that we've been presented as evidence, you can clearly see that's in fact not the case. These officers were aggressive in what we seen was the conclusion, but in another edit as well to the video itself, it shows that they stayed with him until he was properly secured, and that's very important to realize that these cops aren't heartless monsters mowing down minorities. And it also got me thinking, there's a very real possibility that we're dealing with the second coming of a Rayshard Brooks type situation. In case you guys don't remember, middle of June, everything we know about killing of Rayshard Brooks by Atlanta police. On Friday, June 12th, a 27-year-old black man named Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed by Atlanta in what Mayor Keisha Bottoms called an unjustified use of deadly force. Brooks' death, which comes weeks after the nationwide unrest sparked by the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, quickly led to protests, as well as the resignation of Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields. Garrett Rolfe, the officer who killed Brooks, has been fired and now faces 11 charges, including felony murder. The other officer on the scene, Derek Brosnan, is facing 3 charges, including aggravated assault. Below is what we know about Brooks' death and the aftermath in Atlanta. So I recall originally what was reported in the Rayshard Brooks case was Rayshard was merely sleeping in his car. 2 police officers approached him. They had a conversation. It turned violent. And Rayshard ended up being shot in the back. A very well-cultivated narrative. And once that gets busted apart, once the truth eventually came out where that just wasn't the case, we'll just take a brief glance over this article here. Shortly after 10:30 on Friday night, 2 Atlanta police officers, Devin Brosnan and Garrett Wolfe, both who are white, which every time that you see a little bit of a disclaimer as to race, you have to start wondering if the intent of this article is to appeal to the ideologues or if it's there to tell the truth. So both of those police officers responded to a complaint that a man, later identified as 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks, was asleep in his car and obstructing other vehicles in the drive-through lane of a Wendy's restaurant on University Ave in southwestern Atlanta. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, which is investigating the shooting, the officers gave Brooks a sobriety test, which he allegedly failed. The GBI says that when the officers went to arrest Brooks, he resisted, and a struggle ensued, prompting one of the officers to deploy their tasers. Brooks was able to obtain the taser before trying to run away, according to GBI, and then officers pursued Brooks on foot, and during this case, Brooks turned and pointed the taser at the officer. The officer fired his weapon, striking Brooks. Brooks was taken to the hospital, but died following surgery. Now, what was originally reported, what was originally run with, ended up being vastly different than the entire nearly 50-minute video that was eventually put out there. It showed that the 2 officers were having a civil conversation with Brooks. It eventually turned into a struggle when he was resisting arrest. So why did it turn violent when the 2 officers said that they were going to be arresting him because he was in fact failing a field sobriety test, and then he eventually failed the breathalyzer test? We eventually found out that Rayshard Brooks was on probation for 4 crimes, including cruelty to children, and faced going back to prison if charged with a DUI when he was found asleep and intoxicated at Wendy's drive-thru. This explains a lot. This explains why he was so desperate to evade the cops, because he was breaking terms of parole based on being let out due to COVID. As it says here in the rest of the headline, Rayshard Brooks was on probation and faced going back to prison if he was charged with a DUI. The 27-year-old was shot and killed by police after he was found asleep at the Wendy's drive-thru in Atlanta on Friday, June 12th. Now, the reason I bring all this stuff up is I see a lot of similarities between Jacob Blake and Rayshard Brooks. I see the media willfully being unfair in the representation of the entire situation, villainizing the cops when they especially in the Brooks case, because we have the entire lay of the land, willfully villainizing them and painting Rayshard Brooks as a helpless individual who was pulled out of their vehicle for sleeping. And I fear something similar is going to come out about Jacob Blake. And the fact that the riots have already started and look to continue in Kenosha, based on the aftermath of the Rayshard Brooks incident. There was a Wendy's that was burnt down. Atlanta and Georgia declared a state of emergency over the rioting and the destruction that was caused based on media lies. Unfortunately, I don't see the Jacob Blake incident being resolved quickly. We'll wait for the full video for some kind of reliable account of the entire situation to come out first, and hopefully we get proper context to the situation. I think it's another one of these flashpoint incidents that is going to lead to a lot of civil unrest at best and a rioting at worst. It's only going to continue to ramp up until the federal election at the beginning of November, and I just want everybody to know the truth and decide for themselves. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the police were in the right based on the information that we have here, and based on recent history, we kind of know what we can look forward to on a civil unrest front. Once again, guys, thanks for watching, and remember, follow your gut and get after it. Take care.